It is 4:30. Can everyone hear me? My name is Michael Dexter. I will be talking about FreeBSD Virtualization Options. And quick show of hands, am I preaching to the converted? Are you currently a BSD user using all these things, and are you not? Hands up. Cool. Excellent. So, the goal is to give an exciting talk about 800 kilobytes of code. That will require some context. So, this usually doesn't come up in talks, but I am from Hollywood. I spent my first 18 years just over the hills there. This is me in 1975 on a shoot with my parents. And do we have an LA crowd? Anyone? We're at an LA conference? Excellent. So this will explain why some of my calls for testing get some unusual responses, such as from René Aubergenois, Odo, saying, yep, get right on it. I went to school with Tessa and Remy and a number of wonderful stars, some famous, some no longer with us, and it was wild. You may remember that Los Angeles in the 1980s was a pretty wild place. Lots of stars, Fight for Freedom, white gang in the valley, you may recall them. Anyone? And the surf shirts. I'm so glad I found the name of that and found a little artwork. And the Malathion raids, remember in the valley, the helicopters that would just come out, and I'm like getting home from a late yearbook session, and it's like, like a Apocalypse Now, and these helicopters chasing you, and the question was, would they rot the paint on your car? Would they make you grow another head? Whatever. So it was pretty wild. And so lesson number one was about freedom and trust your instincts and know when to leave. I had enough time to confirm that perhaps this was not the place to spend my entire life, but I certainly love the town. And so I went north, went to college in Portland, Oregon. Hey, we've got Randall here. And I discovered Unix. And this was in the good old days. Simulated prompt of an old BSD machine. And the moment I sat down, it became very clear that I was looking at behind the facade. This was the inside of the computer. I had my Mac, and it was solid hardware, but kind of a fragile OS. And the moment I saw that, I thought, okay, this is what's going on under the hood. Much later, Mac finally used Unix in some way. So lesson number two was BSD Unix. This was in January of 1991. Can anyone tell me what was very special about this community in January 1991? Anyone? Linux had not been announced yet. It is pre-Linux, and I'm very grateful I sat down at that point because it was a simpler time. There was good classical proprietary System 5 Unix from AT&T and Company and Friends. There was Sun OS. There was Ultrix. There was AIX and perhaps even HBOX by then, and various proprietary systems. And then the BSD Unix available to universities, such as my own. And it wasn't yet a full, modern, free, wonderful, simple operating system. But back then, there wasn't hardware for wonderful, free systems like we have today. So there were some open source-ish alternatives. There was Minix, there was Mount Xenu, which they used in my CS courses, and there was Coherent, which is a proprietary clone for like $100, and I think it was just recently open source, so better late than never. So, but above all, pre-Linux, we had a very classic environment. We had assembly. We had a choice of assembly, C, SH, Fed, Awk. And our applications, we had BI, Emacs, Nano, Pine, FTP, News Talk. We had a central computer. The teacher pointed out, this machine has less RAM than your dorm room machine. This is a very humble machine, but we had hundreds of users all at once doing their internet work, their Pine, their FTP, everything pre-web. And life was good, dare I say, simple. And it's like, well, what more could you want? Well, granted, you want cat videos, you want wireless internet, you want ubiquitous internet, you want really fast internet, and all these great things that came along, but it's still the transport to what we were doing. So since then, we've gotten these amazing batteries, amazing displays, amazing storage that makes all this thing possible, which was unimaginable then, but still it boots a kernel from a file system and talks to a network. And from a certain perspective, not a whole lot has changed. And we've got smaller, we've got faster, we've definitely got cheaper. And the Raspberry Pi was historic in that you can have probably the equivalent of that central Sun system that served hundreds of academic users for 35 bucks, palm of your hand, you know that whole story. So I'd argue the more things change, well, the more they stay the same. 2015 BSD looks a lot like 1991 BSD when I first sat down with it. Let's see, 2015 BSD looks a lot like 1981 BSD. You may be familiar with the BSDs, maybe not. They are a direct lineage from the original AT&T Unix, where at the University of California, people incrementally replaced components and added components such as the TCP/IP stack that made the internet pretty much possible, and the VI text editor, and a number of things that Bill Joy blasted out when he was back a student then. So that environment has not changed a whole lot. And for this 20, 30, 40 years, we've had a unified operating system. Things have a place. They have standards to adhere to. And one of the greatest assets /user /source, it's been dogfooding for decades, your average BSD. Everything's in there. The compilers you use to compile are uncompiled sitting in there. And once you have a bootstrap system, you can dog food your own system for, well, decades on end. If you have a question about a funny error and the man page doesn't cover it, you can do a recursive search down there, and I guarantee that error is hiding in there somewhere unless it's deep encoded in some weird binary blob, which they generally steer clear of. This makes for durable skills. Everything I learned back then still applies today, unchanged. You learn things once. We have, of course, had innovations since then. Innovations for innovation's sake, not for exciting change for excitement's sake. OpenSSH 1999, back then we were using ClearText FTP, ClearText Telnet. Bad. Are there any OpenSSH users in the audience? Any? Any? And I thought I wasn't preaching to the converted. Jails arrived in 2000. I'll touch on that in depth later. Packet filter out of the OpenBSD folks in 2001. And these each addressed a very clear and present issue, such as the clear text nature of Telnet. Although to this day, Telnet is an extremely useful debugging tool. If you want to make sure your mail server is responding to inquiries and responses, just dive right in and ask it questions. So, BSD today, fast forwarding. You've probably heard of these and their variations. There's a wonderful set of booths downstairs about FreeBSD and OpenBSD and NetBSD, and variations like FreeNAS and pfSense, which I would argue are two of the best, I hope I have a more polite term, gateway drugs that open source has ever produced. My clients close one tab and open up the other, because if they serve Macs, great. If they serve Windows, great. If they serve virtualization, great. It's a very useful piece of software, and you don't need to tell your client it's running anything open source. You don't have to tell them it's not Juniper, Cisco, etc. We have some success stories over the decades. Who recalls when FTPCDROM.com was the highest traffic site on the internet? It's been quite some time, but that was a humble FreeBSD box cranking out very large amounts of traffic. Very briefly, can we get a statistic from Brendan Gregg on Netflix's amount of traffic they push each night?
Well,
Tons. I've heard that on a night when we're all after dinner watching a movie, Netflix is pushing up to a third of the U.S. internet traffic on pretty much off-the-shelf FreeBSD. More than a third now. Thank you, sir. So, if my loaded question is, are there any BSD users here? Well, if you use Netflix, you're technically using it. If you have a smartphone of SCaLE engine Limelight doing nothing more than pushing out lots and lots of traffic, be it ads, be it videos, be it you name it, using the BSD. So There are also the commercial users, NetApp, Juniper, EMC. They've had BSD under the hood for decades. They're active community partners, but they're not as upfront as IX systems, let's say, about saying, hey, we are proud about our use of FreeBSD. Any PlayStation users? Brilliantly, at a recent conference, Meet BSD, the legal department over at Sony finally allowed someone to talk about their use of BSD and nudged at the fact that, yes, they've been using SCaLE, and that's been a coup, but it's been a quiet one that we've been hoping they'd come out of the woods with for a very long time. So all in all, we are very proud of what we've done, of these decades of heritage, but not very loud. I'd almost argue we are Churchillian, not chauvinistic, and what I mean by that is a great quotation from Winston Churchill, and I'll adjust it slightly. BSD is the worst operating system, except for all of those others that appear from time to time. So, all in all, we can celebrate 40 years of replacing Unix with Unix. I collect old 90s articles on replacing Unix with NT, and then followed by, a few years later, replacing NT with Linux. And now, well, going full circle to exactly where we were with the exact same source tree that's simply been updated for a very long time on end. And we also have 40 years of smaller, faster, cheaper. That allows for this miraculous device in my hand, in your hand, in your pocket, etc. So, a quick summary of what, from this perspective, happened between 91 and, let's jump into the future, say 2021. Back in college in the early 90s, I sat on a little committee of students to choose a 64-bit alpha processor for the next replacement, next generation system for the school. And now we're using 64-bit ARM CPUs. Please don't argue with me that that's something new. We've had them long ago. Hard disks have been replaced by really big hard disks and flash storage. There is some genuine innovation in the flash department, but for the most part, we've been pushing around hard disk-oriented file systems on top of flash. They emulate them, they pretend, and only recently have we had any sense of NAND flash awareness, where we embrace the fact that it's not a spinning disk with sectors and tracks and et cetera, et cetera. UFS in these circles has been replaced by ZFS. That's a topic I'll get a little into. That is genuine progress. And in my biased opinion, the number one innovation, well, x86 and ARM hardware-assisted virtualization. We can now party like it is 1974 when Popek and Goldberg announced their formal requirements for virtualizable third-generation architectures. They laid out how it would be done, how it can be done, how we should be doing it, and how to incorporate it into hardware. We finally got there, and enter Beehive. All together now, let's channel Austin Powers. Oh, Beehive. So, this is the exciting 800 kilobytes I referred to earlier. And without context, you might think I'm crazy. It was born at an unconference. I believe 2010 Meet BSD. Historically, one of the few BSD unconferences. Traditionally, they have a very formal structure with even papers and Asia BSDCon, and I just submitted mine. And we got in a circle. We broke all the unconference rules, and everyone met on one subject. You're supposed to break out into breakout groups, but we all got in a big old circle. I should have included the picture. And we realized, okay, we concluded we need a hypervisor. Zen is exciting, but has a lot of moving parts. And Jail is great for what it does, but we're still missing that whole competition with KVM, shall we say. I don't like competitions in our circles because all of you come from different backgrounds and we're brought together. So one of the vendors I mentioned earlier, a storage vendor, produced it. They had their pressing need at the time with acquisitions. This BSD-oriented vendor wanted to put their Linux-based acquisitions into their products very quickly. The way you do that is to drop in a hypervisor and launch that Linux product and never tell the client. What is unique, and as time goes on, this grows in its importance to me, no strings were attached with bhyve. There was not a marketing department writing it. There was not a legal department wrapping it up in patents. It's hard to patent a whole lot in 800K. We'll get to that. And it was just not completely thrown over the wall like a great many technologies, but they allowed the developers to continue with it. They now work independently, contract back to the company and contract out, and it's been a delight to work with them. By dumb luck, I was the first person to ask the developers after they did a presentation about their project, and I thought, that's cool. How do I try it? And they gave me the napkin with little notes. So it's like, here's how it works, and there was more to it, and one thing led to another, and I've been pretty much the community person for bhyve since, and we'll get to some of the events coming up. So here is that exciting 800 or so kilobytes of software. There's a kernel module. It's tiny. When you're using hardware-assisted virtualization, especially for memory management, all that emulation that handles that in QEMU and friends goes away, and you just tell what to go where, and the CPU takes care of it. There's a simple load command, which is a user space FreeBSD loader that's very small. That's typically what you see on a little splash screen for FreeBSD with a little bobblehead logo. There's a utility to terminate virtual machines and report some statistics on them. And then there's the actual control utility that provisions memory for a guest and does housekeeping and makes it all magically happen. And far larger is bhyve grub, a user space grub so that you can launch non-FreeBSD operating systems. This talk won't go too deep into speeds and feeds and interrupts and VM exits. This is available elsewhere on the internet. The VM process is within the bhyve process. There's the host kernel, provisioning resources with the bhyve utility, the magic, ta-da! The hardware extensions in the virtual CPUs, interrupts per CPU, and key thing, the extended page tables. If you have a nifty new piece of hardware, look for the POPCNT, population count demessage flag for your CPU. That's available on modern Intel Core processors, and if you have an older machine like Core 2 Duo, I'm sorry it does not have that, but fortunately we've had enough years of modern Sandy Bridge and such hardware that it's generally pretty available on modern machines. Even the low-end Intel Atoms that now take like 64 gigs of RAM and other amazing things. And then it's in there that the memory management is taking place, all in hardware, key point, and there's this tiny kernel module allowing for that magic to happen. UEFI is being ported to user space so that one can load other operating systems such as Windows and Lumos and other exciting things that a great many users are threatening with checks to have right now. And so the key point is that this is emulation-free virtualization. That's what it looks like. That's how IBM mainframes more or less had fully virtualized systems in the 60s and 70s. In practice today, we have FreeBSD working as a guest, OpenBSD, NetBSD, GNU Linux, and coming soon, as mentioned, with the UEFI would be Windows and Lumos. And when you go with hardware assistance, you can pretty much get bare metal performance. There is nothing being emulated. Or you can do better, and I know of one application that involves high-speed trading, and they are getting up to a 30% reduction in latency on Linux under bhyve. The Linux kernel is not worrying about a USB interface. It's not worrying about a whole bunch of hardware, and hopefully more and more facts on that will be publishable. At the moment, hush hush. Now, jumping to the near future, ARM 64-bit servers such as those from Boston are promising half the watts and equivalent speed of a Xeon E3. I do storage support, and I love Xeon E3s. They're affordable, low power, elegant, reliable, have all the features I need, much bigger caches than, say, the i7s, i5s, unless you get into the high wattage gamer zone. So lesson number 3, stop emulating the 1980 PC. It's been a long time pressuring there, but we're finally seeing an era where we can go from those 1990s Sun hardware and other Unix iron to ARM hardware, bypassing the PC era. Naturally, things like libvirt and saltstack are being ported to Beehive. Beehive only arrived on January 20th of 1994 officially as part of the FreeBSD 10 release. The 10.1 release in November, I believe, had countless updates that didn't make it into the first ones, and AMD support has made it into the tree. It shall be showing up in stable snapshots and FreeBSD 10.2. There are a lot of people with AMD boxes out there, and we want to get them supported, but there's a whole chicken and the egg issue. When you have a small team of like 2 developers, primary ones, they have a fixed set of hardware, and they will not bump into bugs that you will bump into on your unique variation from unique vendor C, D, and E. So a public shout out to the wonderful people who have loaned new boxes to the developers to have for a week and just try out and implement some new features. So the community's been great about that, coming forward saying, hey, here's your login, give me your SSH key, and give it a try, and at least do some burn in, and then we'll put it into production. I appreciate that. You can find out more at the Beehive page of the FreeBSD wiki and beehive.org. And you heard it here. The second BeehiveCon will take place in Tokyo next month during the FreeBSD Developer Summit. And we've had a number of talks. All of the talks from last year are at beehivecon.org. And it's been frustrating that kernel work is sort of all or none. It works great, or it blows up catastrophically. So it's been an eye-opener for me to be involved with that type of project at that level, and learn to truly capture traces and such from a serial console when it blows up. And that information is very valuable, and we'll get into the participatory nature of FreeBSD. Perhaps you know what I'm talking about, Brendan Gregg. So looking back, stepping back from Beehive here and now, let's look at the last 15 years. We've had FreeBSD jails since about year 2000. So FreeBSD 4, I believe, introduced them. And it's been a lightweight container for 15 years. For those familiar with the classic Unix chroot, think of it as a super-duper chroot where you can have your own not init process, but it can run through your RC scripts and launch enough that you have a fully familiar system and think you are master of the world with your own root access, but you're really just contained in a one-way mirror machine where you see your few processes, the host machine sees everything you're doing, and it's pretty close to Linux containers, LXC, perhaps OpenVZ, and Solaris Illumos zones, all of which came later. In that model, you can have a system with binsh, and that's your entire userland. Or you can have a complete standard install world userland that you bring from the build directory that comes directly from source, drop it in, and you have a true off-the-shelf native FreeBSD system within a FreeBSD system. The same applies to Beehive. There's nothing modified. There's virt.io. We'll get into that, touch on that. But I heard the quotation, I'm sorry, but Docker has had more bugs in 2 years than jails in 15 years. I don't like to throw punches, but someone came to the booth today and pointed out, okay, they decided on Docker. We're doing Postgres. Postgres is a pretty big piece of software. It generally runs on a native system. So we need to add SSH to our doc thing. We need to add our profiling utilities. We need to start incrementally getting ourselves back to a full userland. And I did another smile from our friend Brendan Gregg here. And I even have a quotation. Did I include it? Oh, it's on my notes. That this brilliant gentleman in the corner runs dtrace, the imported from Sun wonderful trace toolkit. in production on systems and watches them in situs in a petri dish. And to go with a whole approach that throws away all your useful tools as an administrator just for the hope that you can terminate it and start another one and reboot it it concerns me. I'll say that. It concerns me. But I would love to find out more about this Jetpack that perhaps approaches that, because I will confess, hey, Docker has buzzword power. That's great. Excellent. I hope it solves the problems thrown at it. But similarly, at BeehiveCon last year, someone presented on OSV, Single Application Virtualization atop Beehive. And for packaging up applications, there's the PBI technology out of FreeBSD, where they put all dependencies in a big old application, a bit like Mac OS X. Maybe that will help solve what you're doing, but from my perspective, we've been addressing these issues for a very long time, packaging things up. Embedded developers will know exactly what it means to just make a simple, purpose-built system. Ooh, let me make that note. We'll get it to embedded very briefly. But continuing on the recent 15 years, there are some familiar faces. Let's see, Zen. I trust you're all familiar with Zen. Zen first appeared on NetBSD as a host, to the best of my knowledge, prior to Linux, prior to FreeBSD. And FreeBSD should have DOM0 support in 11. I've been engaging the developer of that and trying to get it working, because I can't bench it if I can't boot it. And we've had a good 5 years, thanks to Colin Percival, of Amazon EC2 support with FreeBSD. There was a brief time one had to pay a Windows tax because the driver for something only worked through an emulated driver, and you had to get a Windows VM. But that was finally resolved. And we've had a whole 30-plus days of DigitalOcean support for FreeBSD. And Randall, were you saying you brought up a machine? 55 seconds to boot up a virtual FreeBSD machine on DigitalOcean directly from Randall Schwartz. So, oh, the typing. Okay, so including typing the host name, which keep them short. This is Unix. So, any virtualization technology is a tool in a tool chest. In and of itself, they're generally useless as one tool. So let's talk about complementary technologies. ZFS, has everyone at least heard of it rather than used it? So according to Matt Ahrens himself in a talk at AsiaBSDCon, FreeBSD is a Tier 1 Open ZFS participant. There are developers working closely to find bugs. There is wonderful, I believe, M.A. Ahrens at FreeBSD user login with commit access. And it is very good to see Sun refugees leave the comfort zone of the Sun startups, not naming any names, and join the broader community, because there are wonderful things to be had out here, and community infrastructure that we never saw from Sun, events like this. So OpenZFS is a proven key point. In the file systems game, if it hasn't been out there 10 years, don't trust anything to it. You can, if you're a developer and willing to file those bug reports, willing to bench it, willing to pound on it versus fire and forget and hope for the best. It is next generation, throwing out the conventions of the last 40 years. It is checksumming. It is snapshotting. It is copy on write. Your data gets written to disk, and it reports back saying, yep, it arrived. We can now dereference the previous copy, rather than overwriting data. And if you lose power or panic midway, well, you have half new, half old, and hope for the best. Used correctly, ZFS is one of the safest places to put your data. I provide ZFS support, and I've seen a great many mistakes, but when used properly, it is spectacular. I will touch more on that in the hallway track or later if time allows. Also in the FreeBSD tool chest, given that any one technology might solve one issue, there is the Capsicum framework that came out of Cambridge, and it is an application sandboxing and capabilities framework. If anyone caught the Berry talk by Brooks Davis in this last slot. They are adding hardware assistance to allow for the application separation, such that if you hit the modern web page, you can hopefully separate every single element of the average 300 elements, graphics, links, scripts, into separate little containment spaces. More can be found online, but that's very promising. It fundamentally addresses that concern from the operating system on up. Briefly on the community, FreeBSD is very participatory. You will get sucked in. You will find yourself submitting bug reports. You will find yourself giving talks at conferences. You will find yourself at late nights with developers fixing that common code. File system developers don't make the mistakes that users make. File system developers don't have the hardware users have. Beehive developers don't have the hardware users have. They need you. They need your insights. Bless his heart, Matt Aarons had never sent a pool to drive savers. Like, how'd it go? He would never make the mistakes that would get him into that situation, but users will do that. So in that participation is the education of how to use these tools properly. And things like YouTube are your friend. Briefly on the community more, FreeBSD has thrived with 3 generations of leadership. I can't think of a whole lot of popular open source operating systems that have done that successfully. They have founders, and those founders continue, and perhaps they're benevolent dictators. Mr. Tenenbaum with Minix is still giving talks, and they're actually importing a whole bunch of NetBSDs. It's like, wow, that's decades of a wonderful leader, but always leaves the question, what will happen if they retire? FreeBSD is backed by a 501c3 organization, foundation, and we're in an increasing sea of trade associations, participating with large vendors who each have their goals and agenda, and there's money concerns at each point, and perhaps non-compete, and all kinds of noise. But the FreeBSD Foundation has been around for, I believe, a decade plus, and very strong community support, very strong vendor support, fantastic travel grants. I confess I've taken advantage of those, and I encourage you to donate. You can do so at the booth downstairs. There's also the BSD certification board member certification group. And okay, show of hands, who thinks certification's a great thing, and who thinks it's a corporate thing to throw on a wall? It's not really, yeah. So at $75, this certification is unique in that you can afford it in the non-privileged environments of the Valley, etc. It can help a student stand out with their resume, CV, in a less funded environment. So I think as a certification backed by a non-profit, they applied to be a C3, they got C6, it is very sincere, run by very sincere people. They want people to learn, get certified, and distinguish themselves with it. It's not a diploma mill. It's not a money maker. It's not a, back in the day, Novell certification, where the best of the best probably would fail the certification, but then those with the certificates, hopefully they know what they're doing. I highly encourage you to keep current on the BSDs, and BSD Now and BSD Talk have done fabulous jobs over the years, very cross-project agnostic. And I'll touch briefly, I don't have a slide on it, about Internet of Things. I don't know if that's been a buzzword at this conference, but the idea is that we will have a processor in every little widget that will do something and be interconnected and provide a security nightmare for those who have to live with it. So I personally believe that the only way Internet of Things can work is to coattail on a community-managed operating system, such as a BSD. And your nifty application should be the bare minimum diff of that operating system, because that defers 90+% of the hard work to wonderful people who are quick to help you out, and you do your one thing. And these people, I've found, will be very quick to help you with your thing, because it's win-win. They probably want to use it. And I believe it was Joy's law, based on William Joy of Sun Microsystems and the BSD Research Group project. The law dictates that the smartest people work for somebody else. So the moment you build a team with what you think are the best of your generation, there are thousands of other people who may have a similar need, similar expertise, and really should be helping you. So that participatory element is unbelievably wonderful in FreeBSD specifically, but the other BSDs, in my experience, are delightful too. You have to learn to respect them and understand their attitudes and get through baggage that a lot of projects have accumulated over the years. So in that, I've found excellent attitude. It took me 30 years to find my people in the community. I'm glad I did. Better late than never. The conferences are amazing. Upcoming is BSDCan, the big North American conference. There's Meet BSD put on by IX Systems. That's every other year, Denny's. There's New York City BSDCon periodically. There's Asia BSDCon and Euro BSDCon, which changes city every year. I like to think there are a few surprises. I believe there's the principle of minimum astonishment when making changes. One can update your average open source BSD over decades. The same file system, yes, you might move from UFS to ZFS, but you can incrementally update your sources, install, update, install. And I thought that was crazy until I realized it works. It works for decades, and there are few revolutions in all that. And I can touch on a demo. I wish to thank you. I have dog-footed this entire presentation with last week's PCBSD snapshot and LibreOffice, and somewhat secretly, I have been running during this entire presentation a FreeBSD guest under Beehive. I've been running, let's see, that's, do I have a uname? Control. I've been running an OpenBSD 5.7 machine. I've been running a NetBSD machine. They're each alive and well. I've been running a CentOS machine, I believe. Does it even give the name? I've been running an Ubuntu machine. Here's the hosts. We have near zero overhead on each. When they are idle, they will drop to 0. And use cases with FreeBSD, the SCaLE engine CDN had that one app that only ran under CentOS. Otherwise, they're a FreeBSD shop. With Beehive, even before it hit release, he dropped that into a VM and has been running it in production since for, I believe, over a year. And the network's been adequate. The internal VirtIO networking's been adequately fast. The storage has been adequately fast. And with that, you get to leverage things like ZFS and its cloning of file systems, its instant generation of additional identical snapshot systems, even if used under jails, which has been used very effectively by various folks. And I'll take questions while we still have a few more minutes.
Questions, raise your hand. I'll bring you the mic. All right, Randy. If you can go back to the FreeBSD tab, it looks like you're running just the release and not the patch 5 version, so you got to do a security upgrade there.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
I pulled that down a few weeks ago. Correct. Very correct. Yes, I
wonder if Brendan Gray can, share any information about SmartOS, because they do the KVM thing, and whether or not they have looked at Beehive or done any metrics of Beehive versus KVM on, SmartOS?
Well, I have done in the past. I have done a lot of performance analysis between KVM and Zen and SCaLE. So in the past, I've done a lot of performance analysis between KVM and Zen and Zones, which is the same as jails. Beehive, that's closer to KVM.
Yes.
So I have not used Beehive, but some of the advantages I like from that type of hypervisor is that you can run tools like dtrace on the guests. You may not be able to see inside them because they're processes, and that's different work that we can go and do. But compare that to, say, Zen, where Zen's running on Metal, and doing some advanced performance analysis is tricky. I've not met a single person who's used Zen Trace. One of these days I will. That's the tracer you use inside the Zen hypervisor. And so I do prefer Type 2 hypervisors in general, just because of the performance observability. Having said that, Zen itself has had a ton of performance work, just a crazy, crazy amount of performance work. It's like universities love to have it as a hobby research project for postgrads. And so there's been, comparing the performance of Zen versus KVM, I wouldn't underestimate Zen because there's just so much stuff, especially with things like PCI pass-through, so that some of the overheads you expect to exist when you're talking to devices can be worked around. But on the other hand, I prefer observability over out-of-the-box performance, and so that's why I like the Type 2 hypervisors, because I can usually bring the OS tools to bear. I'm really excited about Beehive and also FreeBSD jails because it seems like a really good platform. But no, I've not compared Beehive directly to anything yet.
Brian, you'll have to hold that question. Beehive has been ported to Illumos. And if you do an adequate amount of searching for network hypervisor, you will bump into the people who have done it. And we have every reason to believe they will share their work. And we look forward to that. Other questions?
All right, things are looking pretty good here. So I just want, you got any question? Excellent.
The storage, the virtual machine storage, obviously it's ZFS.
So what's the storage? Can you show us the storage? Obviously it's ZFS, but is it like a ZVol per VM, or how do you?
Right. I manage something called VMRC at vmrc.bsdlv, and with it I can use the same framework with a jail, with Beehive, and hopefully, if I have a little time, out of Sun, VirtualBox, and hopefully Zen, where that same block device, be it a ZVol, be it a file, is passed directly in. And I'm currently aiming the same device unmodified at both Beehive and jail, simply mounted loop back, and QEMU here and now. So it's a block device. It leverages, Beehive is FreeBSD. It is simply FreeBSD on FreeBSD, such that any resource available, such as ZFS ZVols, are fully available. You can pass in multiple devices. So if you want to prototype that NAS server, you can do that. Anything you do with the FreeBSD geom stack, for whatever reason, if you wanted to add an encryption layer to that ZVol, I believe you could pipe it straight in, unmodified. I really should try that. You've got me thinking. But it's pretty much off-the-shelf FreeBSD from that perspective. If you are with some nifty Linux project that wasn't demoed out of all two, maybe grab me and we can look at getting the grub config for your Linux under my management system. I don't want to sit down and learn the Arch installer unless it's really straightforward, but I want to support Arch, so it's people like you who can help me generate templates for these systems. I'd love to have every possible GNU Linux out there. It'd be great. I'd love to support them, but I've got enough fish to fry, so if with your help, I'd love to do that. Final questions. Yes, sir, Brian.
Can you show, like, run Beehive, the command line flags, just like on a terminal 50
Yes.
Command line flags for Beehive.
Yes. Let's see what it actually looks like. So I will jump over to the host one. Quit that ls. Oh. I'm in the VM directory. We have blue letters for directories. Let's do OpenBSD. So I will bring that to the top. My management script generates the networking configuration script. It just spits out the commands that are run, and you can rerun them. And so here is the beehive command. I hope you can see it. I'm calling full path user source user sbin beehive, C2 for 2 CPUs, memory 1024, a few housekeeping, shall we say, flags. We are using a special host bridge for OpenBSD that is, I won't say emulated, but compatibility aware. We have a PCI channel 2 AHCI storage device, which is user local VMRC VM OpenBSD AMD numbered image. It is simply a DD created or truncate created image. We have, we could have additional ones. We have on a PCI, I guess bus number 3, a VirtIO network device, TAP 8780, which I base my numbering on, so everything is kept straight. We have a COM port, which will go, in this case, directly to standard I/O, but that can be sent to screen or tmux and fully backgrounded for a server environment. And finally, a name of it. So when I launch this in QEMU, I grab the same variable from memory, I grab the same storage device, and boot it. In my perfect world, one could round trip a net booted piece of hardware, bring it into Beehive, execute it, push it back out, and be completely agnostic as to if you're on bare metal or soft metal. If that answers your question. Yes?
You're aware that VMRC kind of already has a meaning within VMware for the remote console?
Yes, the question is, are you aware that VMRC has a meaning within VMware? I did search the heck out of it. I did come across that. It was not a core marketable initiative or thing you pay money for, as far as I can tell. So I'm not too worried, and I haven't heard from them. Perhaps they will be upset, perhaps not. But in the Unix world, there are a whole lot of 3- and 4-letter acronyms that have been recycled. And does one cut a check for VMRC?
No,
then
for searchability issues, because there's a lot of people that run into issues with the VMware implementation.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully they'll find this as an alternative and say, hey, wait, found a fix. Time check?
Yeah, well, I think that's really it. Let's have a big round of applause.
Thank you, and I will be around this evening and tomorrow about midday. Grab me. I'm happy to talk about all of these wonderful things, and thanks for coming.